G'day, Ross here. Excited to tell you about my new project entitled, modestly, Ross Recommends. We've never had more options on what we can do, and it's hard to know what's really worth your while. Every couple of weeks, I'll be joined by experts and friends to talk about what we've been loving, any aspect of life. Think of it as part review show, part book club, plenty of learning and laughs along the way. Subscribe and follow now to stay up to date with Ross Recommends, wherever you get your podcasts.
From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Julia Carkatzel. It's Monday, May 1. It's been a huge couple of weeks for Fox News. The network's lies about a fraudulent 2020 US election have cost it upwards of $1 billion Australian dollars. It's severed ties with its most popular and profitable news anchors, and the media giant faces more lawsuits in the future. But what will become of Fox after its historic defamation settlement? Will the news machine continue to give the audience what it wants in lieu of what it needs? Or have the events of the past few months paved the way for a broader shift in the company's values? Today, North America correspondent for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, Farah Thomason, on the future of Fox News. So Farah, it's been a huge few weeks for Fox News. What do you make of the events over the past month or so?
Well, I mean, it's been a massive few weeks for Fox News, and it hasn't been particularly great for the company. First, of course, we had the blockbuster defamation lawsuit against Dominion Voting Systems, which led to Fox paying out that whopping $1.2 billion to Dominion.
Moments ago, we learned there is a settlement in the high-stakes trial between Dominion Voting Systems and Fox. Dominion was
essentially peddling misinformation about Dominion's voting machines and saying that the election was rigged in favour of Joe Biden.
And Fox hosts privately acknowledged the vote rigging claims were false, but allowed them to be aired anyway.
Today's settlement represents vindication and accountability. Lies have consequences.
Then we obviously had Lachlan Murdoch, Rupert Murdoch's son, ending his defamation proceedings against Crikey Media. That was in relation to Crikey publishing an article that named the Murdoch family as unindicted co-conspirators in the US Capitol attack.
Starring a small Australian website in the role of David and a huge multinational media corporation in the role of Goliath, but with no guarantees.
And last week, of course, we had the sudden sacking of Fox's top-rating primary host, Tucker Carlson, which sent shockwaves across the media and political landscape here.
Getting more details on Tucker Carlson's banishment from Fox News. Rolling Stone and a number of other sources say Fox News has been keeping a file
and
of dirt.
If that isn't enough, another voting company, Smartmatic, is also suing Fox for defamation for claiming that their machines also rigged the 2020 election against Donald Trump. And then in addition to that, there are two separate lawsuits that have been filed by a former staffer on Tucker Carlson's show, claiming that he created a hostile and pretty sexist work environment. So it's not exactly a great time for Fox right now.
Okay, so let's start with Dominion Voting Systems versus Fox. So we had really braced for a weeks-long defamation trial, which, to our surprise, was cut short when Fox agreed to settle. What did you make of Fox's decision to hand over $1 billion Australian dollars?
Well, I mean, I guess in a way, as Dominion's lawyers said after the settlement, money is accountability. So this was obviously an historic payment, and it was in fact one of the largest defamation payment settlements in US history. I personally was not surprised that they settled. In fact, I remember saying that to a colleague here that I'd be willing to bet good money on an 11th hour deal, and that's exactly what happened. And the reason for that was because there was no way I could see Rupert Murdoch or Fox executives or any of his big name presenters wanting to take the stand in view of all the evidence that had already come out against them, even before the jury had been impanelled. So let's not forget, for the past few months, court filings in Dominion's discovery process had already pretty much revealed so much of the shocking elements of the case. I mean, we knew, for example, that the network had relegated fact for fiction about the 2020 election being stolen. We knew that they didn't really believe claims of voter fraud, but they amplified them anyway. We knew that they carried on doing all of this because they didn't want to upset their viewers or lose their audience or profits to competitors. I think the nail in the coffin for Fox, though, was when the judge who oversaw the case ruled, and this was a couple of weeks before the trial was set to go ahead, he ruled that it was crystal clear, and he actually put capital letters, crystal clear, that none of the election claims related to Dominion were true. So I think had Fox gone to trial, there was always going to be the risk that the jury could have awarded a lot more than the settlement Fox paid, not to mention the humiliation of Rupert Murdoch having to take the stand and others. Mind you, $1 billion, of course, is not chump change, but let's face it, it was only around half the amount of dollars that Dominion was actually asking for. So I guess in terms of reputational damage, it's a very big deal for Fox, but do I think it could have been a lot worse? I believe it could have been.
And as you mentioned before, one of Fox's highest rated news anchors espousing those lies and the Dominion lie is Tucker Carlson, who found himself in the firing line shortly after the settlement. What do you make of his removal?
Look, I think Tucker Carlson is Fox's biggest primetime star. I mean, he was pulling in about 3.3 million nightly viewers to his 8 p.m. show, Tucker Carlson Tonight, which he's had since 2016. I looked at the figures, and last year alone, he brought in $77.5 million in revenue, advertising revenue. To put that in context, dwarfs his Fox News primetime colleagues, and it's obviously more than his main competitors on CNN and MSNBC.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Say what you will about elected Democrats, but they know where the power is. They're like truffle pigs for power, no matter how thick the forest is.
But he's also an influencer of Republican politics. I mean, candidates and politicians love getting on his show because of the exposure they get. He's a vehicle of Donald Trump's brand of populist conservatism, and he's highly influential.
Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida joins us now to explain. Governor, thanks so much for coming on. So you're activating the National Guard. What will they do?
So they've been heavy in this ever since we activated Tucker over the last week to 10 days. Basically, Biden is leaving the Coast Guard out to dry. He's not sending any more.
But having said that, he's also, I guess, a clearinghouse for right-wing conspiracy theories. And I don't think there's anyone who's done more to amplify white nationalism in the mainstream media than he has. One of the ideas, for example, he pushes regularly is this thing called the Great Replacement Theory, which is this idea that migrants and people of colour are being brought into the US to replace white people, which of course is a very dangerous ideology.
Yes. The Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate, the voters now casting ballots, with new people, more obedient voters from the third world. But they become hysterical because that's what's happening, actually. Let's just say it, that's true.
So whether his departure is a change of tact or a realignment for Fox, I think that's yet to be seen. But this was definitely a sacking that no one saw coming, including Tucker himself.
Do you think that Carlson is a scapegoat for the network, or has he actually lost credibility among Fox viewers?
I don't know if he's necessarily lost credibility among his viewers. I mean, the media landscape here in the US is so hyper-partisan, and he has such a hardcore loyal following that I don't see that changing. But in terms of being scapegoated, I guess it's hard to say because we don't exactly know what led to his dismissal. I mean, it could have been the fallout from the Dominion settlement, which obviously exposed a lot of his hypocrisy and his behind-the-scene attitudes towards other staff and towards, I guess, the lies that he was elevating. It could have been punishment for some of the vulgar messages he sent, including one that came out in the filings process, which basically described a senior executive with the C word. And let's face it, nobody wants their boss to kind of see that stuff if they've been, saying derogatory things about them behind the scenes.
Directed at executives. These texts were said to be so offensive, Fox didn't know whether to fire Carlson or to give him another hour on primetime. It's easy to forget how much Tucker Carlson has...
And it could have been damage control over another set of lawsuits that have been filed by his former producer, Abby Grossberg, who claims that Tucker and Fox basically oversaw this sexist and hostile work environment. I mean, one story she sort of tells is of coming into work on her first day, and there were pictures of Nancy Pelosi in a bathing suit all over the workplace, and she had to remove one from her computer just to get working. So it could have been all of the above. He did hint that he's far from done. He put out a video on Twitter. I mean, he's essentially talked about the fact that, and I'll just read the quote here, when honest people say what's true, calmly and without embarrassment,
they become powerful. At the same time, the liars who've been trying to silence them shrink and they become weaker.
And then he sort of ended it with, I'll see you soon.
There is hope. See you soon.
So there's obviously a sense of he's not done yet.
And you can see in the comments lots of his loyal viewers are choosing not to watch Fox anymore and take that stand, disagreeing with that decision. So we've learnt from legal filings that Tucker Carlson didn't believe a lot of his own commentary with regards to election fraud, his views of former President Donald Trump. Can you elaborate more on some of those views?
Well, I mean, I guess the Dominion court filings really sort of exposed a lot of the hypocrisy and the hubris and the attitude that Tucker Carlson had. I mean, one text, for example, revealed that he hated Donald Trump passionately. I mean, he called him also a demonic force. And at the same time, he was elevating the former president's claim of a rigged election. Another revealed how he sought to get Fox's White House correspondent, Jackie Heinrich, fired for tweeting that there was no evidence of voter fraud, even though he privately agreed. And there was a lot of emphasis, I guess, on really profits and audience share, and it became quite clear that he was very much, along with others in the Fox family, really pushing a lie that they believed to not be true. But I guess the thing about Fox is that it has this audience that has, I guess, reliably delivered influence and profits to them for decades. But Fox also knows that, I guess, in the age of social media, in this age of powerful disinformation campaigns, and with right-wing cable networks such as OAN or, as I said, Newsmax, that audience can really move on if they don't like what they're being given. I mean, we saw that at the 2020 election, for example, when Fox became the first station to call the state of Arizona for Joe Biden. Trump and his supporters, you might recall, were livid. I mean, they basically, a lot of them turned to other cable networks who were offering them a version, I guess, of their own reality. It's interesting, going back to the Dominion trials, Murdoch in his own deposition in that case basically spoke about how he attempted to straddle the issue of election fraud without angering the president or his supporters. I mean, he basically said, no one wants Trump as an enemy. He can essentially take our audience and tell them to go elsewhere. You know, one producer even texted another presenter, Maria Bartiromo, in late November, basically saying, our audience doesn't want to hear about a peaceful transition. They still have hope. So really, I mean, Fox does kind of push the narrative. It's built an empire, giving the audience what it wants, and Tucker Carlson has been very much at the forefront of that.
Yeah, so as you say, you know, what happened to Carlson and the Dominion lie defamation trial is really a consequence of that, of how the news machine itself works, trapped by the desires of its audience. Is there a chance Fox will change their reporting now after all this has happened? And is there any chance of something like that happening?
I guess one of the things that, you know, Fox's controversies have presented is this idea of whether it's finally changing tact or whether it's sort of just in damage control, and I guess what impact that will have on the landscape. I have sort of asked people about this. There are some who take the view somewhat optimistically that perhaps this is a sign of, you know, Rupert Murdoch kind of realising that things became too extreme under Tucker Carlson. You know, things like the Great Replacement theory, you know, some of the views he espoused were in fact sort of dangerous, particularly with regards to the election or the January 6 insurrectionists. There is a sense that maybe this is a pivot to the sensible centre, but look, I mean, it's not as though other primetime hosts who hold relatively similar views, it's not as though they have been removed. So I guess I would be very surprised if this was in fact some kind of, you know, new ideological pivot. And others have also suggested that, you know, at the end of the day, it was Fox who elevated Tucker Carlson. They gave him that 8 p.m. slot, which is the primetime slot in the US. They basically fed him to, as one person said, throw red meat to his audience ever since. So in some ways, they're just as responsible for what's sort of taken place here. The Murdoch empire always has a way of sort of continuing to rise, even in its greatest controversies. I reckon Fox can weather the storm, they can get through the short-term pain, and they may not necessarily be affected too badly in the long term.
Thanks for your time today, Farah.
No worries.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by me, Julia Carcatzel. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy the show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Julia Carcatzel. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.
This is Neil Mitchell. The most powerful word in the world is why. It's the word on which all good journalism should be based. I love asking it. That's why my new podcast is based on that one word. I'll talk to well-known people, not so well-known people, politicians, police, ask why they did certain things or made certain decisions. The other rule for this podcast, it must be interesting. You can subscribe to Neil Mitchell Asks Why wherever you get your podcasts.